Her voice rose from the smoking ruins calm as a Sunday prayer. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The gunman pinned beneath the dog whispered, "She is a ghost." She was not a ghost. She was a mail-order bride, and she had just blown up her own house to survive. But to understand how a Philadelphia girl ended up reciting psalms over the bodies of 15 men sent to kill her, you have to go back to the beginning. She stepped off the stagecoach into nothing. No husband waiting, no house in sight, just three bearded mountain men standing on the porch of a log cabin and 100 miles of wilderness stretching in every direction like a promise nobody intended to keep. The letter had said there would be a home. The letter had said the men were honest. The letter had said a lot of things. The letter had lied. But to understand the woman on the mountain, you first have to understand the mountain itself, and the men who made it their fortress against a world they no longer trusted. Before we go any further, if you are new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I share new frontier stories every single week, and drop a comment telling me where you are listening from tonight. I would love to know. Now, let us go back to the autumn of 1878, back to a place called Whispering Pines, Wyoming Territory. The town sat in a narrow valley along Sterling Creek, wedged between granite walls that rose 1,000 feet on either side like the ribs of some ancient beast. It was a place of contradictions. The streets were mud, but the mayor wore silk. The bank was solid brick, but the schoolhouse roof leaked when it rained and collapsed under the weight of snow every February. There were 43 buildings, 2 churches that competed for the same 40 souls, 1 saloon called the Gilded Spur, and exactly 0 honest men in any position of power. The man who owned the town, and make no mistake, he owned it the way a rancher owns cattle, was Mayor Harlan Croft. Then, he had arrived in 1870 with Eastern money and a politician's smile, the kind of smile that showed all the teeth, but never once reached the eyes. Within 3 years, he had purchased the bank, the livery stable, and the general store. More importantly, he had purchased the loyalty of Sheriff Virgil Drayton, a man whose badge was bought rather than earned. Drayton kept order in Whispering Pines the way a dog keeps order in a yard. He barked when told to bark. He bit when told to bite. And he never once asked whether what he was doing was right. But Croft's brother Cornelius had been different. Cornelius was the decent Croft, the one who married a Philadelphia widow named Margaret Whitfield and adopted her young daughter Eliza as his own. Cornelius loved that girl, taught her to ride, taught her to read ledgers, told her stories about the frontier that made her eyes shine with a light he recognized as courage. When Cornelius died in a carriage accident, an accident the territory ruled accidental, but the whispers said otherwise, Harlan inherited everything his brother had built. Everything except one document, a single piece of paper bearing the seal of the territorial governor, the original deed to the Sterling Valley water rights. Now you need to understand something about water in the West. Water was not a convenience. It was not a luxury. It was power. Pure, absolute, unchallengeable power. Whoever controlled the water controlled the cattle. Whoever controlled the cattle controlled the ranchers. And whoever controlled the ranchers controlled the valley of the town and every living soul in it. Croft understood this the way a wolf understands the scent of blood. He had already begun the construction of an illegal dam upstream, a massive earthwork and stone structure built by hired hands and draft horses designed to divert Sterling Creek into channels that only he controlled. Every rancher in the territory would have to pay him for the privilege of watering their herds. Every farmer would kneel at his gate. The dam would make him king. But there was a problem. That deed, that one piece of paper, without it, his dam was illegal. Without it, any rancher with a good lawyer could challenge him. Without it, his empire was a house of cards waiting for a stiff win. He believed his stepdaughter had it. He had torn apart her room, searched her luggage, interrogated her with the calm cruelty of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. But the girl would not break. And so Harlan Croft devised a plan of exquisite cruelty. He would not kill her outright. That would raise questions. Instead, he forged a letter. A mail-order bride advertisement written in a hand that mimicked the rough script of a mountain man, signed with names that were not his to use. The Blackwood brothers. 3 men who lived on a ridge so high and so remote that mail took 6 weeks to arrive and visitors never came back the same. He paid the $40 bride fee from money he had stolen from the brothers' own cattle sales. He intercepted their mail so they would never see the response. And he put Eliza Whitfield on a stagecoach headed west toward a mountain that would, he was certain, kill her before Christmas. Now let us go to that mountain. Blackwood Ridge sat at 8,000 feet, a shelf of rock and timber jutting from the Teton Range like a fist raised against heaven. The air up there was thin enough to make a flatlander dizzy and cold enough to freeze spit before it hit the ground. It was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are often beautiful. The kind of beauty that could kill you if you stopped to admire it too long. 3 brothers lived on that ridge. 3 men who had chosen the silence of pines over the noise of civilization, the company of elk over the company of men. They were the Blackwood brothers. And on the morning of October 14th, 1878, they woke to a day that would change everything they thought they knew about solitude, about strength, and about love. Caleb Blackwood rose before dawn. He always did. He moved through the dark cabin with the silence of something predatory, bare feet on packed earth hands, finding the iron poker by memory alone. He did not light a lamp. He did not need one. He had lived in this cabin for 10 years since he rebuilt it with his own hands in '68, and he knew every plank, every knot, every creak in the floorboards the way a blind man knows his own face. He was the eldest, 35 years old, 6 feet and 7 inches of muscle built not by vanity, but by labor. Shoulders that filled door frames, hands the size of small shovels scarred across the knuckles, calloused to the consistency of saddle leather. His beard was a thicket of black and gray, premature gray earned not by age but by the weight of being responsible for 2 younger brothers since he was 18 years old. They called him Grizzly Blackwood in town, though he had not been to town in 4 months and had no intention of going back anytime soon. His morning ritual was precise. Stoke the fire, hang the coffee pot on the iron hook over the flames, take the skinning knife from its sheath on the wall, and sit by the window where the first gray light would find him. Then he would sharpen. Not with oil the way city men did it, but with water on a flat river stone, drawing the blade across the wet surface in long measured strokes. The sound filled the cabin like a heartbeat. Shh, shh. It was the only music Caleb Blackwood needed. His parents had taught him this. Ezra and Ruth Blackwood, who brought their 3 sons to this ridge in 1859, who built the first cabin with nothing but an axe and a dream of freedom. They died of fever in the winter of '61. Both of them, within 3 days of each other. Caleb was 18. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching his mother and father burn with sickness, too terrified of contagion to step inside, too loyal to walk away. His father Ezra died reaching for his mother's hand. Ruth followed him 2 days later, as if she simply could not bear to let him go alone. Caleb buried them the next morning in the meadow behind the stable. He dug 2 graves in frozen ground with a pickaxe in his bare hands, and when the dirt was mounded and the stones were placed, he stood there for a long time looking at the sky. He was 18. Josiah was 14. Emmett was 11. There was no one else. No relatives. No neighbors within a day's ride. Just 3 boys on a mountain and a winter that did not care whether they lived or died. Caleb never spoke about that day. He never allowed himself to need anyone again. He built walls around his heart the way he built walls around his cabin, log by log, year by year, until the fortress was so complete that even his own brothers could not always find the door. Josiah came down from the loft at first light. Where Caleb was brute force, Josiah was a blade, lean, precise, watchful. 31 years old with auburn hair, cut short in the military style he never abandoned, and hazel green eyes that missed nothing. He had left Blackwood Ridge in '63 at the age of 16, lying about his age to enlist in the Union Army as a scout in the Dakota Territory. He was 18 when the war ended in '65, old enough to carry the scars, not yet old enough to heal them. His morning routine was a soldier's routine. He checked the perimeter. Not the casual glance of a rancher surveying his fence line, but the methodical sweep of a man trained to read terrain the way a scholar reads Latin. He examined boot prints around the stable. He checked the trip-wire alarms he had strung across the northern trail, thin linen fishing line attached to small bells salvaged from the mule's harness. A crude early warning system invisible in the forest light, designed by a man who had once tracked Sioux war parties through country that would kill a careless man in an afternoon. Josiah kept a journal, weather patterns, game movements, and recently something else. Someone had been riding the Lower Ridge Trail 3 times in the past 2 weeks. Josiah had noticed the tracks, measured the horseshoe impressions, calculated the weight of the rider. He had not told his brothers yet. He did not have enough data, but his scout's instinct was humming like a telegraph wire in a storm. Emmett was the last to wake. He always was. 28 years old, the youngest, the loudest, and by a considerable margin, the most handsome of the Blackwood brothers. He rolled off his bunk, groaning, nearly tripped over the floppy-eared hound dog sleeping on the floor, and stumbled to the coffee pot with the coordination of a man who had not yet accepted that morning was a real thing that happened every single day. The dog's name was Sergeant. Josiah had brought him home from the army, a mutt of uncertain parentage and absolute loyalty, but the animal had somehow become exclusively devoted to Emmett, who fed him scraps under the table when he thought no one was looking. Everyone was always looking, Caleb disapproved. Josiah noted it in his journal. Emmett kept doing it anyway. Emmett's mornings were loud in a cabin where silence was the default language. He talked to the dog, he talked to the horses, he talked to the coffee pot as if it were a person who owed him money. He was the brother the town knew. The one who came down the mountain to trade pelts for flour and gunpowder, to hear the news, to laugh with the barkeep and flirt with the general store owner's daughter, who was not interested but appreciated the effort. Emmett was the bridge between the Blackwood Ridge and the world below. 3 weeks ago, on one of his trading trips, Emmett had overheard something. Pike, one of Mayor Croft's hired thugs, laughing drunk at the bar about a surprise waiting for the Blackwood boys. Emmett did not understand the joke. He filed it away the way a man files away a strange noise in the dark, not knowing what it means, but knowing it means something. He was about to find out. It was midday when Emmett spotted dust on the lower trail. He was up in the high meadow checking the horse line, a rope strung between pines, where the 3 saddle horses and the mall grazed on the last of the autumn grass. He pulled his spyglass from his coat and put it to his eye. His heart stopped. A woman. Not a prospector's wife, not a missionary. A woman in a navy blue dress stumbling on the shale, her skirts catching on every rock and branch as if the mountain itself were trying to hold her back. She was leading a rented livery horse that looked one hill away from dying, and she carried a leather satchel in one hand, while the other clutched a Bible against her chest, as though it were the only solid thing left in her world. Her hair was honey gold, mostly escaped from its pins, falling in tangled waves around a face that was flushed red from exertion and streaked with trail dust. Even through the spyglass at 200 yards, Emmett could see 2 things clearly. She was beautiful, and she was terrified. Emmett did what Emmett always did. He rode down to meet her at a gallop, which in retrospect probably terrified her more than it helped, but his instincts were social before they were tactical. He pulled up short, his horse skidding on loose rock, and the woman stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared up at him. This enormous sun-bronzed man on a snorting horse dust, swirling around them both like smoke from a fire that had not yet been lit. Her eyes were blue, cornflower blue, wide with fear and something else, something harder, defiance. She lifted her chin. "Are you one of the Blackwood brothers?" Her voice was breathless but clear. Eastern, educated, the kind of voice that belonged in a parlor room reading poetry, not gasping for air on a mountain trail in the middle of Wyoming territory. "Depends on who is asking," Emmett said, surprised by his own caution. She reached into her satchel and produced a letter. Crease-stained with travel, but bearing a clear signature at the bottom. "My name is Eliza Whitfield. I am your mail-order bride. I have come from Philadelphia, and I would very much like to sit down." Emmett took the letter. He read it twice. His face cycled through confusion, alarm, and then a slow burning fury as he recognized the handwriting. It was not his. It was not Caleb's. It was not Josiah's. Someone had forged their names. Someone had paid the bride fee. Someone had sent this woman 2,000 miles to a place where winter came early and mercy came late. "Miss Whitfield," Emmett said, carefully folding the letter, "I think there has been a misunderstanding." "Has there?" she said. Her voice did not waver, but her hands were shaking. She had spent every penny she owned on this journey. She had no return ticket. She had nowhere else to go. Because the letter was quite specific. It said 3 brothers on a mountain needed a wife and a homemaker. It said the land was beautiful, and the men were honest. She paused. It also said there would be a cabin. "Is there a cabin?" Emmett looked up the mountain. "There is a cabin," he admitted. "But ma'am, we did not write that letter." The composure cracked, just barely, just for a moment. Her lower lip trembled, her eyes glazed with the beginning of tears. Her grip on the Bible tightened until her knuckles went white. But she did not cry. She breathed. She squared her shoulders. She had been doing that her whole life, Emmett realized, squaring her shoulders against things that should have broken her. And then she said the words that changed everything. Then someone sent me here to die, and I have a very good idea who. Emmett brought her up the last stretch of trail. He put her on his horse and walked beside her, one hand on the bridle, stealing glances at this impossible woman who had appeared on his mountain like a vision from a fever dream. By the time they reached the cabin clearing, Caleb and Josiah were already waiting. Josiah had spotted them through his spyglass 20 minutes ago and alerted Caleb. The two older brothers stood on the porch like sentinels guarding the gates of a kingdom nobody had tried to enter in a very long time. Caleb's arms were crossed over his massive chest. Josiah leaned against the door frame, one hand resting near the revolver on his hip. Neither smiled. Neither spoke. They simply watched as Emmett led the woman into the clearing, and the silence that hung between the five of them. 4 people and 1 tired horse was heavier than the October sky. Caleb spoke first. He did not greet her. He addressed Emmett. "What is this?" "Her name is Eliza Whitfield," Emmett said. "Someone sent her up here as a mail-order bride. She has a letter with our names on it." He handed the letter to Caleb. Caleb read it. His expression did not change because his expression was always stone. He handed it to Josiah without a word. Josiah read it twice, his hazel green eyes narrowing to slits. "This handwriting," Josiah said slowly, "it is formal, practiced. This was not written by a frontiersman. This was written by someone who uses a desk for a living." "Someone in town," Caleb rumbled. "Someone who wanted her here," Josiah added, his voice dropping. "Or more accurately, someone who wanted her gone." Eliza stood in the middle of the room. She had been studied, analyzed, and discussed as though she were a stray horse that had wandered into camp. The cabin smelled of smoke-cured leather, gun oil, and pine resin. The ceiling was low enough that Caleb had to duck through the doorway. The floor was packed earth covered with bear furs. It was unmistakably the domain of men who had forgotten what softness felt like. Sergeant the dog padded over to Eliza and sniffed her hand. In the way of dogs, he made his assessment instantly and with complete certainty. He laid his head on her knee and sighed. "I know who sent the letter," Eliza said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Mayor Harlan Croft. He is my step-uncle. He has been trying to get rid of me for 3 months." Silence. The fire crackled. The wind moaned against the logs. "Why would the mayor of Whispering Pines send you to us?" Caleb asked. His tone was not hostile, but it was not warm. It was the tone of a man who had survived 17 years in the wilderness by never trusting anything he did not kill himself. "Because I have something he wants, and he believes that sending me here to 3 men who live alone on a mountain, who come to town twice a year, who have no connections to law or society, is the same as throwing me into a grave." She held his gaze. "He expects me to die this winter. He expects you to let me." The brothers exchanged glances. A wordless communication developed over 17 years of shared survival. Caleb's jaw tightened. Josiah's hand moved away from his revolver. Emmett sat down heavily on a stool. "And what is it you have that he wants?" Josiah asked, his voice quiet and precise as a scalpel. Eliza hesitated. She had known these men for less than an hour. She was deciding whether to trust them with her life. She looked at Caleb and saw strength. She looked at Josiah and saw intelligence. She looked at Emmett and saw warmth. She was not ready to reveal everything. Not yet. She needed more time. "Not yet," she said. "I will tell you. But first I need to know, are you going to send me back down that mountain?" Caleb walked to the window and looked at the sky. Snow clouds were building over the peaks, massing like an army preparing to charge. The pass would close within days. If they sent her back now, she might make it to town before the first storm. If they waited even one more day, she would be trapped here until spring. 5 months. 5 months with a woman in a cabin built for 3 men who had not heard a woman's voice since their mother died 17 years ago. Caleb turned back. "Josiah, what does the weather say?" "Storm in 2 days, maybe 3. Pass closes for the season." "Emmett, how are provisions?" Tight for 3, manageable for 4 if we hunt hard before the snow locks us in. Caleb looked at Eliza. His amber eyes, deep set and unreadable, studied her the way a man studies a trail before committing to follow it. You stay, he said, not because of any letter, not because of any deal. You stay because I will not send a woman down a mountain into a storm. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a commandment carved in stone. But you should know, this is not Philadelphia. There is no piano here. There is no French philosophy. There is wood to chop, meat to cure, and a winter that will try to kill you every single day. The mountain does not care who you are. The mountain will kill you just as dead as it would kill me. Eliza met his gaze. I understand. My bed, Caleb continued, gesturing to the bunk against the wall. You take it. I sleep on the floor. You pull your weight as best you can. You do not touch the rifles without asking. And you never go outside alone. Ever. Understood. One more thing, Josiah added from his chair, his calculating eyes fixed on her. When you are ready to tell us what Croft wants, and I mean truly ready, you tell all 3 of us at once. No secrets in this cabin. He paused. Secrets kill people on this mountain. Eliza nodded, but her hand tightened on the Bible. The deed was in there, folded between the pages of Psalms pressed against her ribs. She was not ready. Not yet. She needed to know if these men were worth dying for, because that might be exactly what trusting them required. That evening, while the last light bled from the sky and the first cold fingers of winter crept under the cabin door, Eliza watched the brothers prepare dinner. Venison stew with dried beans seasoned with nothing but salt and a crumbling bay leaf that Josiah had found in the back of the pantry. The food was edible in the way that survival food is edible. It sustained, but it did not nourish. Meanwhile, far below in the valley, in the back room of the Gilded Spur Saloon, Mayor Harlan Croft sat with his 2 best men, Pike, broad as a barn door and twice as dense, and Dutch, who talked too much and laughed at his own jokes, a dangerous combination in a man who carried a gun. The stagecoach confirmed she departed. Pike reported, his voice flat as hammered iron. Driver left her at the lower trailhead. She is on foot from there. Croft smiled. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the lamplight. A Philadelphia girl, alone, walking up to Blackwood Ridge in October. He laughed softly. She will be dead before Thanksgiving. And if those mountain fools try to help her, the winter will kill them both. Come spring, when the snow melts, we ride up and recover the body. We search her belongings, we find the deed, and then we finish the dam. Dutch leaned forward, his eyes small and mean in his weathered face. And if she does not die, the smile vanished from Croft's face like sun behind a storm cloud. He set down his glass. He looked at Dutch with the cold calculation of a man who had disposed of problems before and would not hesitate to do so again. Then we make sure she does. Back on the ridge, the first night settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket made of darkness and wind. Eliza lay in Caleb's bunk, which was too large for her and smelled of bear fur and tobacco. She listened to the cabin breathe. 3 distinct patterns of breathing surrounded her. Caleb's deep and rhythmic from the floors near the fire, where he had made a pallet of bear hides and a rolled coat for a pillow. He slept light. She noticed this. Every time the cabin creaked, every time the wind shifted, his breathing changed. And every hour without fail, he rose to stoke the fire. He did this silently, a shadow moving through the darkness, feeding logs into the flames to keep the cold from reaching her. Josiah's breathing was controlled, and even from the bunk above, the breathing of a man who had trained himself to sleep anywhere in any conditions and to wake instantly at the sound of danger. He slept with one hand near his revolver. Old habits from a war that ended 13 years ago but still fought its battles in his dreams every single night. Emmett's breathing was irregular, punctuated by soft mumbles. He talked in his sleep, which Eliza found oddly comforting in this terrifying place. Sergeant lay at the foot of Emmett's bunk, snoring with the peaceful abandon of a creature who had decided that all was well with the world. Before the evening settled fully, Caleb had stood at the woodpile behind the cabin, axe in hand, staring at the mountains. He had built his entire life around control. Control of his environment. Control of his emotions. Control of his brother's safety. Every variable on this mountain had been calculated, managed, predicted. And now standing inside his carefully constructed fortress of solitude was a variable he could not predict. A woman with cornflower blue eyes and a secret that smelled like trouble. He swung the axe, the wood split clean. He thought about his mother, the last woman who had lived in this cabin, the last woman whose voice had softened the silence. His mother died reaching for his father's hand. Caleb had buried them both the next morning. He had not spoken about it since. He had not allowed himself to need anyone since. And now this Philadelphia girl with her ruined shoes and her steady eyes had walked into his world, and he could feel the walls he had built log by log, year by year, beginning to crack. He swung the axe again, harder. The first week on Blackwood Ridge was a series of small revolutions and quiet revelations that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to reshape the architecture of 4 lives. On the third morning, Eliza took over the kitchen. She did not ask permission. She simply rose before Emmett, which was not difficult, and began to work. When the brothers woke, the cabin smelled different. She had taken their bland venison and transformed it using the dried herbs hanging from the rafters that 3 men had looked at for 10 years without once wondering what they were for. Sage rubbed venison strips, a broth seasoned with wild thyme, and coffee. Coffee brewed properly for the first time in a decade. The brothers had been making coffee by dumping grounds directly into boiling water and letting it stew until the resulting liquid was thick enough to stand a spoon in. Eliza used a cloth filter tied over the mouth of a tin cup, pouring hot water through the grounds, slowly letting gravity do the work. The result was clear, aromatic, and free of the sediment that had been a permanent feature of Blackwood mornings since 1868. Emmett drank 3 cups and declared it the finest thing he had ever tasted, including the whiskey at the Gilded Spur. Josiah took a second serving without comment, which was the highest compliment a quiet man could give. Caleb ate his portion, set down his spoon, and said simply, "You can keep cooking." It was not a compliment. It was a recognition of competence. Eliza accepted it as such. She discovered the cast iron stove, an Acme Champion model from '72, 300 pounds of iron that had been hauled up the mountain by 2 mules. It had 4 burner holes in oven and a built-in water heater. In 10 years, the brothers had used exactly 2 of the burner holes. They placed a pot on top. They heated it until the contents were edible. That was the entirety of their culinary ambition. Eliza discovered the oven the way an explorer discovers a new continent. Within a week, she had baked bread. Real bread using a sourdough starter she cultivated by leaving a mixture of flour and water in an open bowl by the window for 3 days, catching wild yeast from the mountain air itself. When the smell of fresh bread filled the cabin, Caleb stood in the doorway for a long time, and though he said nothing, something shifted behind his eyes. That smell. Bread baking. It was the smell of his mother, the smell of before, the smell of something he had believed was lost forever. On the 5th day, Eliza noticed that Josiah's shirt had a tear in the shoulder that had been repaired with saddle stitching. Functional, yes, but so crude it was almost aggressive, as though the person who sewed it had been angry at the fabric for tearing. She offered to fix it properly. Josiah hesitated. That shirt was the last one his mother had made. The tear happened during a hunt 3 years ago. He had worn it torn rather than risk making it worse. Eliza took the shirt, carefully turned it in the firelight, and with a needle and thread from her satchel, she mended the tear with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. When Josiah put the shirt back on, he stood very still for a moment, feeling the mended fabric against his skin. He did not thank her in words. But that evening, he moved a chair to the table so she would have a proper seat instead of the overturned crate she had been using. It was the first piece of furniture in the cabin arranged specifically for her comfort. The first real conflict came on the 7th day. Eliza needed to bathe. She had been wearing the same navy blue dress for 5 days and felt filthy beyond endurance. The creek was 40 yards from the cabin, screened by pines, but Caleb's rule was absolute. She did not go outside alone. She asked him to escort her. He refused. Not out of impropriety, but because Caleb Blackwood genuinely could not comprehend why a human being would voluntarily immerse themselves in near-freezing water in October. In his world, bathing was a summer activity. In winter, a man kept the natural oil on his skin for insulation. The notion that someone would deliberately plunge into water cold enough to stop a heart for reasons of hygiene was to Caleb evidence that city people suffered from some fundamental defect of reasoning. "You will catch pneumonia and die," he said flatly. "Then I will have to explain to whoever comes asking why I'll let a Philadelphia woman freeze herself to death in a creek." Eliza's temper flared for the first time. It was a sight to behold. This small woman, 5 feet and 4 inches, standing toe-to-toe with a man who could have lifted her with one arm, her blue eyes blazing with a fury that made Sergeant whimper and crawl under the table. "I have been wearing this dress for 5 days, Mr. Blackwood. I smell like a horse. I will bathe or I will lose my mind, and I assure you a mad woman is far more dangerous than a clean one." Josiah, seated at the table, looked up from his book, raised one eyebrow, and returned to reading. It was his way of saying, "She has a point, and you should concede, brother." Emmett volunteered to stand guard, facing away, not watching. He emphasized this with a blush that made Josiah smirk. Emmett stood at the tree line, his back to the creek, whistling, "Oh, Susanna Maw," at a volume sufficient to scare away any curious bear within half a mile. When Eliza returned shivering but clean wrapped in the fur that Emmett had given her, she found that Caleb had heated a stone by the fire and placed it beneath the furs on her bunk, wrapped in cloth, positioned exactly where her cold feet would rest. He did not acknowledge it, neither did she. But that small act of care, a warm stone placed in the dark while she was not looking, spoke louder than any declaration. It was the first almost touch. No skin met skin, just warmth offered indirectly disguised as practicality. And because it was disguised, because it was hidden, it was more intimate than any embrace. On the seventh night, the storm hit. Not a gentle snowfall, a Wyoming blizzard, a screaming white fury that reduced visibility to zero and dropped the temperature to a place where exposed skin froze in minutes, and the wind cut through clothing like a knife through paper. The pass closed. The world shrank to the cabin in the 40 yards of visibility surrounding it. They were sealed in. 4 people, 1 room, and a secret that burned in Eliza's chest like a live coal. The storm also revealed character in unexpected ways. For the first 2 days, the brothers maintained their routines with military discipline. Caleb kept the fire burning and monitored the walls for leaks. Josiah rationed provisions and tracked the barometric pressure by the ache in his war-wounded shoulder. Emmett cared for the horses in the lean-to-stable built against the cabin's south wall. But on the 3rd day, when the wind reached a pitch that made conversation impossible and the walls shuddered with every gust, the cabin began to feel like a coffin. It was Eliza who broke the tension. She found a deck of cards in Josiah's bunk, worn dog-eared, missing the 7 of diamonds. She held them up. "Anyone," Emmett agreed instantly. Josiah raised an eyebrow, but pulled his chair closer. Caleb refused, then watched the 3 of them play for an hour, then silently pulled up a stool and accepted a hand. He played with the same intensity he brought to everything, and he was to everyone's genuine astonishment terrible at cards. His face was too honest. A good hand made his jaw clench. A bad hand made him exhale through his nose like a bull contemplating a charge. Emmett exploited these tells without mercy. Eliza pretended not to notice. Josiah kept a running tally in his journal, recording wins and losses with the gravity of a military dispatch. 4 people playing cards in a blizzard. It was a small thing, but it was the first time they were not survivor and burden protectors and protected. They were 4 people sharing a moment of normalcy. It was the first brick in the foundation of something none of them had a name for yet. But they would. In time, they would call it family. On the 4th night of the storm, Eliza woke to a sound she did not recognize. A low, agonized moan from the corner of the cabin. She lay still, heart hammering, until she realized the sound was coming from Josiah. He was asleep, but his body was rigid, his hands gripping the blanket, his face contorted. A nightmare. The sounds he made were not words, but fragments. Orders. Warnings. The vocabulary of combat. "Get down! Down! Medic! We need! No, please!" Eliza did not move. She had read enough to know that waking a soldier from a nightmare was dangerous. But she watched Caleb, already awake, always awake. He rose from his pallet on the floor and crossed the cabin in silence. He placed one heavy hand on Josiah's shoulder. He did not shake him. He did not speak. He simply held him. The weight and warmth of that hand anchoring his brother back to reality. Josiah's breathing slowed. The nightmare released its grip. Caleb returned to his pallet without a word. Eliza lay in the dark, listening to the storm howl against the walls, and thought these men are not the savages the town believes them to be. They are wounded, they are lonely, and they have been carrying each other for so long that they have forgotten there might be another way to live. As the storm raged through its fifth day and the snow piled against the cabin walls like a besieging army, Eliza read her Bible by firelight. She did this every evening, turning to the same pages, touching the same passages. Psalms, always Psalms. And Josiah, watching from across the room, with the patient eyes of a scout who had spent years learning to see what others missed, noticed something. She was not reading the way a devout person reads scripture. She was not meditating on meaning or searching for comfort. She was reading one specific section over and over, and her fingers lingered on the binding, touching something between the pages that was not paper. She is hiding something in that book, Josiah thought. And whatever it is the reason she is here. He said nothing, not yet. Trust could not be forced. It could only be given. And Josiah Blackwood, who had earned trust from soldiers in the blood and mud of Dakota Territory, understood that some things must unfold in their own time. The first week ended with the storm still raging and the pass buried under 6 feet of snow. 4 people had established a fragile peace in a cabin built for 3. Caleb provided. He hunted chopped wood, maintained the structure. Josiah planned. He rationed supplies, tracked weather patterns, kept watch. Emmett bridged. He told stories, made Eliza laugh, and unconsciously positioned himself between her and any potential threat. And Eliza transformed. She cooked, she mended, she organized, and slowly, carefully, she began to make this bachelor's fortress feel like something none of the brothers had experienced since they were children. She made it feel like home. But beneath the surface, tension simmered like water in a covered pot. 3 men, 1 woman, a secret in a Bible, and a villain in the valley below who was already planning what he would do if the winter did not finish the job he had started. They thought they were sending her to her grave. They did not realize they were delivering a weapon directly into the hands of the men who would know exactly how to use it. The weeks passed the way winter passes on a mountain. Slowly, relentlessly, with a grinding patience that wore down everything soft and left only what was strong enough to endure. November came without announcement. There was no calendar on the wall of the Blackwood cabin, no marked dates, no circled holidays. Time was measured differently at 8,000 feet. You measured it by the depth of the snow against the doorframe, by the number of logs remaining in the woodpile, by the slowly diminishing level of flour in the barrel and coffee in the tin. And now, for the first time in 10 years, time was also measured by something else entirely. By the small, steady changes that a woman's presence brought to a place that had forgotten what change felt like. The cabin's ecosystem shifted. Before Eliza, the brothers had operated in a functional but joyless efficiency. They ate to survive, slept to recover, worked to eat again. A closed loop of necessity that repeated without variation, without complaint, without joy. Eliza introduced something none of them realized they had been missing. Intention. She did not just cook venison. She seasoned it, arranged it on tin plates she had scrubbed until they gleamed, and served it with a sprig of dried sage laid across the top like a garnish in a Philadelphia dining room. She did not just mend shirts. She reinforced the elbows, knowing where the fabric wore thin from axe work, and she tightened the buttons before they fell off rather than after. She hung bundles of dried herbs by the door, not just for cooking, but because the scent of sage and wild thyme transformed the cabin from a shelter into something that resembled a home. These details mattered. They were the language of care spoken in a dialect that 3 men who had been caring for each other in the bluntest possible terms were now encountering for the first time. And it unsettled them, each in a different way. Caleb found himself pausing in the doorway watching her work. He would catch himself standing there, one hand on the frame, his massive silhouette blocking the gray light, and he would look away quickly, irritated by his own attention. He had lived without softness for 17 years. He did not want it now. He did not need it. But the cabin smelled better. The food tasted better. And at night, when the wind screamed and the temperature dropped to 20 below and the walls groaned under the weight of accumulated snow, he found himself sleeping lighter. Not from vigilance, from something else. He was listening for her breathing, making sure she was warm, making sure she was safe. He hated this. It made him feel exposed in a way that no blizzard, no grizzly bear, no armed man had ever managed. Josiah watched Eliza with the analytical eye of a military scout cataloging terrain. He noted her habits, the way he noted game trails and weather patterns. She woke early but pretended to sleep until Caleb left the cabin, giving him privacy for his morning ritual. She stretched her hands each morning, flexing fingers that were nimble, and practiced the hands of someone who had once played an instrument. She flinched slightly, almost imperceptibly, whenever anyone raised a hand quickly near her face. Josiah had seen that flinch before, in soldiers who had been struck by superior officers, in horses that had been beaten by cruel handlers. It was the involuntary reflex of a body that remembered violence even when the mind tried to forget. Emmett fell for Eliza the way a river falls off a cliff, completely noisily and without a single moment of hesitation. He brought her wildflowers preserved under ice, their petals frozen in the moment of blooming. He carved a small wooden horse and left it on her pillow, which made Caleb scowl and Josiah raise an eyebrow, but which made Eliza smile in a way that lit the cabin brighter than any lamp. He taught her to play cards badly because he let her win, and she knew he was letting her win, and they both pretended otherwise because the pretending was part of the fun. One afternoon, with the snow falling in thick curtains outside, Emmett spent 3 hours building a sculpture of Sergeant out of packed snow. The result looked less like a dome and more like a lopsided potato with ears. Eliza laughed until she cried. It was the first time she had cried since arriving on the mountain, and the release of it, the permission to feel something other than fear, was a gift that Emmett gave her without knowing he had given it. Then came the boots. Eliza's shoes, her fine Philadelphia leather boots with their delicate stitching and thin soles designed for cobblestone streets in wooden floors, finally surrendered to the mountain. The shale trails, the frozen creek crossings, the endless mud had worn through the leather until the soles separated from the uppers, and her stockinged feet touched frozen ground with every step. She tried to hide it, wrapping strips of cloth around her feet, tucking the makeshift bandages inside what remained of the shoes. But Caleb noticed. He always noticed. He saw the blood seeping through the white rags when she walked from the stove to the table, and he said nothing because Caleb Blackwood never said anything when action would serve better than words. He disappeared into the storage room. For 3 evenings after the day's work was done, after the wood was chopped and the horses fed and the perimeter checked, Caleb sat in the corner of the cabin working with a draw knife and a pile of cured elk hide. The hide had been tanned using the old method his father taught him. Soaked in a solution of tannin from oak bark for 2 weeks, then wrung stretched on a wooden frame, dried slowly near the fire, but not too near because too close made the leather brittle and too far made it rot. When the hide was ready, he cut it with the precision of a man whose hands, despite their enormous size, were capable of remarkable delicacy. He lined the interior with beaver fur, the softest he had. He stitched the soles from multiple layers of rawhide using sinew thread waxed with beeswax to make it waterproof. The stitching was rough. Caleb was not an artisan, and the boots were by any objective measure ugly, but they were warm. They were waterproof, and they fit Eliza's small feet perfectly. Because on the second night of his work, after she had fallen asleep, Caleb had knelt beside her bunk and traced the outline of her old boot on a piece of bark, holding his breath the entire time so as not to wake her. On the 4th morning, he placed the boots by the fire to warm. He said nothing. When Eliza woke and saw them, she looked at the boots, then at Caleb, who was already outside chopping wood, with his back deliberately turned toward the cabin. She put them on. She walked across the cabin. She walked to the door and stepped outside into the snow. For the first time in weeks, her feet were warm, truly warm. She felt the beaver fur pressing against her toes, the solid rawhide protecting her soles from the frozen ground, the careful stitching that held everything together with the stubborn determination of the man who made them. "Thank you, Caleb," she said to his back. "Saves me from having to carry you when your toes fall off," he grunted, swinging the axe. "I hate carrying things." But Emmett, watching from the porch with Sergeant at his feet, saw Caleb's face in the moment after Eliza spoke. There was a softness there, fleeting, quickly buried like a wildflower that blooms for a single hour in the crack of a granite wall. It was a look Emmett had never seen on his brother's face, not since their mother was alive. December arrived with the deepest cold any of them could remember. The temperature dropped to 30 below at night, and the cabin windows frosted over with patterns that Eliza traced with her fingertip, creating absent-minded art that Emmett watched with fascination and Caleb watched with something closer to devotion, though he would have rather fought another grizzly bear than admit it. The cabin had become a small, functioning society. They had routines, now rhythms that interlocked like the gears of a watch. Caleb rose first, Josiah second, Eliza third, Emmett last. Coffee, breakfast, chores, the long afternoon of work, the evening meal, the firelit hours before sleep. They had even developed inside jokes. Emmett's ongoing feud with a particular mouse that raided the flour sack every night despite increasingly elaborate countermeasures. Caleb's absolute refusal to acknowledge that Eliza's cooking was better than his own, a denial so transparent that even Sargent seemed to roll his eyes. But beneath these domestic rhythms, the unspoken question pulsed like a second heartbeat. The Bible. Eliza read it every night by firelight. The same section. Psalms, over and over. Her fingers lingering on the binding, touching something between the pages. Josiah had been watching for 6 weeks. He had cataloged every detail. And now on a night when the fire burned low and the wind outside had finally mercifully gone quiet, he broke the silence. "It has been 6 weeks, Miss Whitfield." His voice was calm, not accusing, expectant. "You said no secrets in this cabin. I have respected your timing. But I have watched you read that Bible every night, and I do not believe you are reading the Lord's words. I believe you are guarding something. And if that something is why Croft sent you here, then it affects all of us. We deserve to know." Caleb stopped sharpening his knife. The rhythmic sound that had filled the cabin every evening for 10 years went silent. Emmett leaned forward, his easy smile gone, his blue-gray eyes serious for once. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. Shadows danced on the log walls. She looked at each brother in turn. The same assessment she had made on her first day, but this time she knew them. She had watched Caleb risk his life in a blizzard to rescue a horse trapped in a snowdrift, wading through chest-deep snow for 2 hours without complaint. She had seen Josiah quietly give her his extra blanket on the coldest nights, never mentioning it, never expecting thanks. She had heard Emmett talk in his sleep, calling for his mother in a voice so young, so lost, that it made her chest ache with a tenderness she had not felt in years. She trusted them. She decided. She opened the Bible. From between the pages of Psalms, she pulled out a folded document bearing the seal of the Wyoming Territory. "This is the original deed to the Sterling Valley water rights," she said. "My stepfather Cornelius Croft left it to me. It was hidden in this Bible which he gave me for my confirmation. His brother Harland has spent 3 months tearing apart my belongings searching for it. He never found it because he never thought to look in a Bible. He considers religion beneath him." Josiah took the document with hands that trembled slightly, hands that had held steady through gunfire and blizzards, hands that recognized the weight of what they were holding. "This grants full ownership and control of Sterling Creek and all tributary water sources within Sterling Valley to the holder of the deed," he read aloud. His voice was hoarse. "This is the whole valley's water. Every ranch, every farm, every head of cattle depends on this creek." "I know," Eliza said, "and Croft is building a dam." Josiah continued, the pieces clicking into place with the precision of a rifle mechanism. "Without this deed, he has no legal claim to the water. He is operating illegally. If this deed surfaces, his entire empire collapses." "That is why he tried to kill me," Eliza said quietly. The room went still. Caleb stood. His full height filled the cabin, his head nearly touching the low ceiling, his shadow stretching across the wall like something ancient and immovable. "What did you say?" Eliza told them. She told them about the weeks after her mother's funeral when Harlan took her to his house and played the grieving uncle while systematically searching every item she owned. She told them about the questions daily relentless about documents her stepfather may have left behind. She told them about the night Harlan came to her room, drunk on bourbon and frustration, and grabbed her wrist. She pulled back her sleeve. In the firelight, all 3 brothers saw it. A faded bruised yellow-green with healing circling her wrist like a shackle made of memory. Caleb's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles went white. He said if I did not give him the deed, he would declare me insane and commit me to the territorial asylum in Evanston. No one would question it. A hysterical orphan girl, overcome with grief. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. When I still refused, he pushed me. From the second-floor balcony, I fell onto the stone courtyard. I broke 3 ribs in my left hand. She held up her left hand, The fingers were slightly crooked, healed improperly, the bones knitting themselves back together without the benefit of a doctor's care. It was a hand that would never play piano properly again, though none of the brothers knew this yet. "He did not mean to injure me," she said. "He meant to kill me. When I survived, he had to play the concerned uncle until he could find another way to dispose of me without raising suspicion." She paused. "Sending me here. That was his disposal." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of a dark primal rage that emanated from Caleb Blackwood like heat from a forge. His jaw was set. The tendons in his forearms stood out like cables. The amber in his eyes seemed to darken to something deeper, something ancient and dangerous. He knelt beside her, eye level. He took her hand, the broken one, and held it in both of his. His palms were rough, calloused, enormous against her small fingers. He held her hand the way a man holds something precious that has been damaged by carelessness, with infinite gentleness and barely contained fury at whoever caused the damage. "He made a mistake," Caleb said, his voice a low growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "What mistake?" "He let you live, and he gave you to men who know how to hunt." For the first time, Eliza leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was not a kiss. It was something deeper. A covenant. An alliance sealed not with words or signatures, but with the simple act of two wounded people pressing their pain together and finding that the combined weight was somehow lighter than carrying it alone. "We have to survive the winter first," she whispered. "We will," Caleb promised. "And come spring, we are going to rain hell on Whispering Pines." From that moment, the cabin was no longer a shelter of convenience. It was a war council. The deed was placed in a tin box and hidden beneath a stone in the fireplace. And 4 people, 3 mountain men and 1 mail-order bride, began to plan. In the days that followed the revelation, the cabin's emotional landscape shifted. Walls came down. Not the log walls that kept the cold out, but the invisible ones that kept the truth in. One evening, while Caleb was outside checking the perimeter and Emmett was tending the horses, Josiah and Eliza sat by the fire in rare silence. She was mending a shirt. He was cleaning his revolver. And then, without preamble, without looking up from the oiled steel in his hands, Josiah spoke. "I loved a woman once, a nurse named Sarah. She served at the field hospital in Fort Rice. She argued with surgeons twice her age and laughed like the world owed her nothing." He paused. The cloth in his hand stopped its slow circles on the barrel. "She died of typhoid 2 days before the war ended. She wrote me a letter the morning she fell sick. I still carry it." Eliza did not say she was sorry. She did not offer comfort. She said, "Tell me what she was like, not how she died, what she was like." Josiah was quiet for a long time. The fire popped. A log settled, sending sparks spiraling upward like tiny orange stars. Then slowly he told her about Sarah's laugh, about the way she read poetry to wounded men who could not read themselves, about the letter that smelled of camphor and lavender and ended with the words, "Come home whole, Josiah Blackwood. I will be waiting." He talked for longer than he had talked about anything that was not tactical in 13 years. And when he finished, something in his face had loosened, not healed, not resolved, but loosened like a knot pulled too tight for too long that had finally been given a fraction of slack. Eliza understood then why Josiah watched Caleb and her with such careful attention. He was not jealous. He was not competing. He was a man who had loved once and lost, and he was watching his eldest brother walk towards something Josiah himself would never have again. And he was grateful. Grateful that the walls Caleb had built, the walls that had worried Josiah for 17 years, were finally beginning to crack. Josiah taught Eliza to read maps and understand territorial law. They spent evenings poring over his surveyor's manual, identifying the boundaries of the water rights, documenting Croft's illegal dam construction based on what Emmett had observed during his last trip to town. Josiah drafted a formal complaint to the territorial governor, though they had no way to send it until the pass opened. Caleb taught Eliza to shoot. He placed the Winchester 73 in her hands. She recoiled at first, not from the weight, but from the memory. Men with weapons had threatened her. Men with power had tried to break her. "I know what you are feeling," Caleb said, surprising her. He rarely spoke about feelings. "But this rifle is not a threat. It is a promise that no one will ever put their hands on you again." He stood behind her, positioning her shoulders. His hands, those enormous calloused hands, capable of splitting a log with a single swing, were extraordinarily gentle as he adjusted her grip. He showed her the lever action mechanism, how to pull the lever down, to eject the spent brass and push it up to chamber a new round. He explained windage and bullet drop with the patience of a man who had all winter and no desire to be anywhere else. Wind is coming from the east, he instructed. Drop your aim an inch, breathe in, hold it, squeeze the trigger. Do not pull. Crack. The tin can jumped off the stump. 50 yards away, a hole punched clean through the center. Dead center, Caleb murmured. And there it was, a smile. Not hidden in the beard this time, but visible in his eyes, warm and genuine, and surprised by its own existence. I had a good teacher, Eliza said, lowering the rifle. She looked up on him. Morning light caught the stray hairs escaping her braid, turning them to spun gold. Caleb stared at her for a moment too long. Then he cleared his throat and stepped back. Again, he said, this time every can is Croft. Emmett taught her to ride, not the side saddle trot of a Philadelphia lady, but the full gallop of a frontier woman. She fell off 3 times. Each time Emmett helped her up, brushing snow from her coat with careful pawns and a grin that made falling feel like flying. By the end of December, she could ride well enough to keep pace with the brothers and shoot from the saddle, which was a skill Caleb never expected from a woman who had arrived in ruined shoes and a prayer. Josiah drilled her on tactics. If someone comes through the front door, where do you go? If the window breaks, what do you do? He taught her to reload under pressure while Emmett banged a pot to simulate gunfire. She fumbled with the cartridges. She dropped them. She picked them up and loaded again. In battle, Josiah told her, your hands will shake, your vision will narrow, your ears will ring. You train now so your body remembers what your mind forgets. Christmas Eve arrived without ceremony. The brothers had no tradition of celebration. Christmas on the mountain was just another day of survival, another log on the fire, another meal of venison and beans. But Eliza insisted. She hung pine boughs from the rafters, filling the cabin with the scent of fresh green. She cooked a meal using everything she had learned about mountain cooking, stretching their dwindling provisions into something that felt, if not festive, then at least deliberate. And then sitting by the fire with the pine scent thick in the air and the snow falling silent and heavy outside, she sang, softly, a carol from her childhood. A song her mother used to sing while kneading dough in their Philadelphia kitchen, back when the world was small and safe and smelled of fresh bread. Caleb sat by the fire with his eyes closed, listening. The sound of a woman singing in his cabin, in this cabin, where the only music for 17 years had been wind and the scrape of steel on stone. The melody wrapped around him like something he had been missing without knowing it was gone. When the song ended, silence filled the space it left behind. Emmett wiped his eyes and blamed the smoke. Josiah stared into the fire, lost in a memory of his mother singing that same carol in this same room in another lifetime. Caleb opened his eyes and looked at Eliza. My mother used to sing that, he said. It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her, perhaps to anyone. So did mine, Eliza replied. Their eyes held across the firelit room. It was not a kiss. It was not a declaration. It was a recognition. 2 people who had lost everything finding something neither expected, a reflection of their own loneliness in someone else's eyes. And the sudden terrifying realization that loneliness once shared is no longer loneliness at all. Caleb stood abruptly. I need to check the horses, he said, and disappeared into the cold. Emmett watched him go. Then he turned to Eliza, and for once the grin was gone. In its place was something quieter, something that cost him. He likes you, Emmett said softly. He just does not know how to say it. He has not spoken to a woman in 17 years, not since our mother died. Give him time. And you, Eliza asked. Emmett smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. It was a brave smile, the kind that costs everything and shows nothing. I like you too, Eliza, but I am smart enough to know the difference between what I want and what is right. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was thick with a maturity that surprised even himself. Caleb needs you more than I do. He just does not know it yet. It was the most grown-up thing Emmett Blackwood had ever said. Josiah, pretending to read his book in the corner, raised it slightly to hide a proud smile. His little brother, the wild one, the reckless one, the one who led with his heart and cleaned up the mess later, had just performed the most selfless act Josiah had ever witnessed. He had loved and he had let go, not with bitterness, with grace. That night, the door to the cabin did not need to be bolted against the cold. Something had shifted, something quiet and irreversible. Eliza lay in her bunk, listening to the breathing of three men who had become, without anyone planning it, without anyone saying it aloud, her family. And somewhere deep in the frozen earth beneath the cabin, in a tin box hidden under a hearthstone, a piece of paper bearing the seal of the Wyoming Territory waited for spring, waited for justice, waited for the war that was coming, whether any of them were ready or not. Because far below the ridge in the valley, where the snow was thinner and the ambitions were thicker, Mayor Harlan Croft was growing impatient. He had expected word by now. He had expected Dutch to ride up and find a body, a frozen girl in a frozen cabin, the deed somewhere in her belongings, the problem solved by Winter's indifferent hand. But no word came, and the silence from Blackwood Ridge was beginning to sound less like death and more like defiance. Croft poured himself another bourbon and stared at the map on his wall. The dam was half finished. The contracts were signed. The money was committed. He needed that deed, and he was running out of patience with nature's timeline. "Dutch," he said, not turning from the map, "how soon can you ride up there?" "Snow is deep, boss. Trail is bad. But I can make it in a day if I push hard." "Then push hard. Go up there. Find out if the girl is dead. If she is, search the cabin. If she is not—" He turned from the map, and the lamplight caught his face in a way that stripped away the politician's smile and revealed what was underneath. Something cold, something calculating, something that had already decided what needed to be done and was simply waiting for the right moment to give the order. "If she is not dead, then we will discuss our options." Spring was still weeks away, but the first cracks were appearing in Winter's armor, and through those cracks, violence was seeping upward like water through fractured stone, seeking the path of least resistance toward the people on the ridge who had dared to survive when they were supposed to die. Dutch came up the mountain on the last day of February riding a horse he had beaten half to death on the climb. He was not trying to be quiet. He was not trying to be clever. He was a man who had been promised $20 and a bottle of whiskey for verifying a corpse, and he rode into the clearing at Blackwood Ridge with the casual arrogance of someone who expected to find nothing but bones and silence. He found something else entirely. Josiah's tripwire bells rang at 11 minutes past 8 in the morning. The sound was small, almost delicate, a tinkling of metal against metal that could have been mistaken for wind chimes if anyone on Blackwood Ridge had been foolish enough to hang wind chimes on a military early warning system. Josiah heard it from inside the cabin where he was cleaning his revolver. His hand stopped moving. His eyes went to the loophole, the narrow slit between the logs he had cut months ago for exactly this purpose. "One rider," he said, "South Trail, not trying to hide." The brothers moved with a coordination that required no discussion, no plan, no wasted words. Caleb grabbed the Winchester from the wall mount. Josiah shifted to the primary loophole. Emmett moved to the back door with his rifle covering the blind side. And Eliza rolled out of her bunk, dropped to the floor, and crawled to the side loophole with the Colt revolver Caleb had given her 3 weeks earlier. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. She was not the same woman who had stumbled up this trail 5 months ago in ruined shoes. She was something new. Dutch rode into the clearing, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the frozen ground, and hollered at the cabin like a man yelling at a dog. "Blackwood, come on out. Mayor wants a word." Caleb stepped onto the porch. The Winchester was leveled at Dutch's chest. "Get off the horse." Dutch grinned. "Easy, Grizzly. I come in peace. Mayor Croft sent me to check on his investment. He figured the girl would be dead by now. Wanted me to verify the body so he can file the death certificate. She is alive, and she is none of Croft's concern anymore." Dutch's eyes slid to the cabin window. The curtain moved. Something cold and calculating crossed his face. "That right? Well, that is a shame. See, the mayor's been busy. He has 20 men on payroll now, hired guns from Cheyenne. He is finishing the dam come spring, and he needs this ridge for the reservoir overlook." Dutch leaned forward in his saddle. "He is coming up here whether the girl is breathing or not." From inside the cabin, Eliza watched through the loophole. Her finger rested on the trigger. She could hear every word. Matter of fact, Dutch said, his grin widening into something ugly. I reckon I do not even need to ride back. I kill you, Blackwoods take the girl, claim the bounty. 3 birds, 1 stone. He drew. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Dutch's hand found his pistol. Caleb fired. The Winchester roared and the sound bounced off the canyon walls like thunder from a clear sky. Simultaneously, Josiah fired from the loophole a second shot that struck Dutch's horse in the flank, causing it to rear violently. And Emmett burst from the back door, sweeping the tree line with his rifle in case Dutch had not come alone. Dutch fell from the saddle. He was dead before his body hit the frozen ground. His horse bolted down the trail screaming, leaving tracks in the snow that pointed like an arrow back toward Whispering Pines. Caleb dragged the body to the ravine edge and pushed it over. Josiah searched the saddlebags and found what he expected. A letter from Croft written in the mayor's own practiced hand, authorizing Dutch to verify the disposal of the Whitfield asset, and if the brothers resisted, to resolve the matter by whatever means necessary. He called you an asset, Emmett said to Eliza, his face tight with a fury that burned hotter for being quiet. Like cattle, like property. Eliza took the letter and read it. Her hands did not shake. She had moved past fear, past anger, into something harder and colder. Something with edges. He is coming with 20 men, she said. We need to be ready. We have 3 weeks, Josiah estimated, studying the sky. Maybe 4 before the pass opens enough for a large group on horseback. 3 weeks to fortify against 20 men, Caleb said. And 1 woman who can shoot, Eliza added, her blue eyes level. Do not forget about me. Caleb looked at her. This small, fierce woman in elk-hide boots and a feed-sack apron holding a revolver with the confidence of a soldier. For the first time since she arrived, he did not see a responsibility. He did not see a problem to be solved. He saw a partner. I could never forget about you, Eliza, he said. The words surprised them both. The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation that would have impressed any military commander who cared to observe it. Caleb worked the exterior. He dug shallow trenches in the tree line, covering them with pine boughs. He rigged tripwires with bells. He took the 4 sticks of dynamite he kept for clearing rock slides and buried them at the narrowest point of the trail, running the fuses under frozen mud. To bury charges in frozen ground, he built small fires on the surface for 2 hours to thaw the earth deep enough to dig, then placed the sticks, connected the fuses, and packed everything back with mud that froze solid within the hour. He calculated fuse length by heartbeat. 4 feet of fuse, 5 seconds of burn, enough time to light it and find cover. Barely. Josiah planned the defense from inside the cabin, sketching tactical maps on the back of his journal pages. He designated firing positions. Caleb in the rock outcrop for flanking fire. Eliza at the side loophole for covering the approach. Himself at the primary loophole for command. Emmett at the back for guarding the windowless west wall and managing the horses in case retreat became necessary. He counted ammunition. 240 rounds for 3 Winchesters, 60 rounds for 2 Colts. Against 15 to 20 men, that meant every bullet had to find its mark. No suppressing fire, he ordered. Every bullet has a name on it. Josiah also prepared something the others did not expect. A legal affidavit drafted by lamplight while the others slept, documenting every crime Croft had committed. The forged letter, the attempted murder of Eliza, the illegal dam, the authorization of armed assault. He signed it, had Eliza sign it, sealed it in oilskin, and gave a copy to Emmett for the emergency saddlebag. If we fall, Josiah told his youngest brother, you ride for Cheyenne, not Whispering Pines. Cheyenne. The territorial marshal is a man named Aldrich. I served with his brother in Dakota. Give him this document and Croft hangs. But Eliza was the quartermaster. She melted every scrap of spare lead, casting bullets over the fire until her fingers blistered. She filled every bucket, pot, and basin with water from the creek, knowing that once the shooting started, they would be cut off from the stream. She tore extra linens into bandage strips. She boiled pine resin into a thick paste that could be used to seal wounds. And she wrote 2 copies of a legal statement documenting everything, hiding one in the Bible and sealing the other in the oilskin pouch. On the last night before they expected the attack, the 4 of them sat together by the fire. The cabin was stacked with ammunition. The windows were fortified. The trenches were dug. There was nothing left to do but wait. Caleb broke the silence. When this is over, he said, staring into the flames, I am building a bigger cabin. This one is too small for 4 people. 4, Eliza asked. You are staying. It was not a question. Yes, Eliza whispered. I am staying, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because everywhere else is nowhere without you. She looked at him. He looked at her. And in the firelight, with the mountain holding its breath around them and the war waiting just beyond the ridge, something passed between Caleb Blackwood and Eliza Whitfield that did not require words, witnesses, or ceremony. It was a vow made in silence, sealed by the simple act of choosing each other on the eve of a battle they might not survive. Josiah stood. He pulled Emmett and Sergeant toward the door with the ease of a man who had suddenly remembered urgent business outside. I need to check the perimeter, he said, which was the most transparent excuse in the history of excuses, and everyone knew it and nobody objected. The door closed softly behind them. When morning came, everything had changed, and nothing more needs to be said about it. Dawn broke gray and cold, and from the valley below the crows rose, startled squawking, bursting from the lower canopy in a black cloud of alarm, the signal that Josiah had been waiting for. Something large was moving up the trail, something that frightened the birds. They are here, Josiah said from his position at the window. Through his spyglass he counted the riders. 15. Not the 20 Dutch had promised, but enough. Mayor Harlan Croft rode at the rear of the column because Harlan Croft always rode at the rear, letting other men's bodies serve as his shield. He wore a marshal's badge pinned to his silk vest, a badge he had awarded to himself to give the raid a veneer of legality. Pike rode at the front with a double-barreled shotgun across his saddle. Behind them, a loose column of hired guns, drifters, men promised $20 and all the whiskey they could drink. Men who had been told they were riding against one mountain man and a dead girl. They had been told wrong. Spread out, Croft's voice echoed up the canyon. Surround the cabin. Burn them out if you have to. The lead rider's Pike and a hired gun named Rawlins crossed the invisible line where Caleb had buried the dynamite. From his position in the rock outcrop 50 yards from the cabin, Caleb lit a lucifer match, cupped the flame against the wind, and touched it to the fuse. The spark hissed. It raced through the frozen dirt like a copper snake. 3, 2, 1, yee. The explosion rocked the mountain. The trail erupted in a geyser of mud rock and shale. 2 horses screamed, rearing back, throwing their riders. Pike was blasted from his saddle, landing in a snowdrift 20 feet away, deafened, bleeding from both ears. Rawlins and his horse bolted back down the trail in blind panic. The formation shattered, men shouted, horses wheeled. Chaos reigned. Now, Caleb roared. From the cabin, Eliza opened fire. She did not panic. She did not spray bullets. She remembered everything Caleb had taught her: breathe in, hold, squeeze. She picked her targets, the men trying to regroup, the ones reaching for rifles, the one running toward the cabin with a torch. Her first shot knocked the hat off a gunman raising a shotgun. Her second hit a hired man in the shoulder, spinning him into the snow. Caleb fired from the flank, methodical, precise. Each shot from his Winchester, followed by the smooth lever action and the calm acquisition of a new target. Josiah fired from the primary loophole, calling targets with the detached precision of a military spotter. 2 men behind the big pine 20 yards. One has a torch. Eliza shifted, tracked the torchbearer, and squeezed. The man yelled, dropping the burning brand into the snow, clutching his wounded hand. Good shot, Josiah said, and there was real admiration in his voice. Caught in a 3-way crossfire, Croft's men scrambled for cover behind boulders and trees, but they were pinned. Every time someone raised a head, a bullet chipped bark or sparked off stone inches away. They have got a whole army up there, one of the hired guns screamed. It is 3 men and a woman, you coward. Croft shrieked from the rear, hiding behind a thick oak. Push forward, flank them. But nobody pushed. When the boss screams, charge from behind, while bullets fly in front, $20 loyalty melts faster than spring snow. While the main battle raged at the front, 3 of Croft's men circled to the west wall. The blind side. No windows. They crept through the timber, carrying torches and oil-soaked rags, led by a Cheyenne gunman named Wade Harker. Emmett saw them. He was alone on this side with his rifle, his revolver, and Sergeant. He did not call for help. He stepped from cover and fired, dropping the first man. The second threw his torch at the cabin wall. Emmett shot the torch out of the air, a shot that defied probability and would become part of the legend whether he wanted it to or not. Harker was faster. He fired at Emmett. The bullet grazed his side, tearing through his shirt, drawing a line of fire across his ribs. Emmett stumbled, but did not fall. Sargent, with the heroic stupidity of a loyal dog, charged at Harker, barking furiously. 1 second of distraction. Emmett's next shot sent Harker's rifle spinning from his hands. Face down. Emmett ordered, blood seeping through his shirt. Hands behind your head. Move and the dog eats you. Sargent planted himself on Harker's back and growled with a conviction that suggested he understood the assignment perfectly. At the front, Caleb was pinned. 3 gunmen had him suppressed behind his rock outcrop, chipping away at his cover with steady fire. He could not move. Covering fire, he yelled. Eliza saw his predicament. She shifted position, exposing herself slightly to get a better angle. She fired 3 shots in rapid succession, forcing the gunman to duck. Go, she screamed. Caleb sprinted across the open ground. A bullet caught the meat of his left shoulder, spinning him half around but not stopping him. He dove through the back door and collapsed on the floor, breathing hard, his arms slick with blood. You are hit, Eliza said, already moving toward him with the pine resin and bandages. Scratch, he gasped, but his shirt was soaked crimson from the collar to the elbow. Josiah checked the wound. Through the muscle, missed the bone, he confirmed. Bleeding heavy, but he will keep the arm. Eliza applied the pine resin with hands that had once trembled at the sight of a rifle but now moved with the steady precision of a battlefield nurse. Their faces were inches apart. She could see the pain in his amber eyes, and behind the pain, something fierce and tender. Do not you dare die on me, Caleb Blackwood, she whispered. Would not dream of it, he rasped. Have not finished your cabin yet. Outside, the shooting stopped. Croft's voice floated through the smoke like poison through water. Blackwood, you hear me? I have men on every side. We are going to pile brush against your west wall and smoke you out. Give me the deed and I will let you live. Eliza looked at the pantry, at the heavy barrel of flour, the flour she had used all winter to bake bread to fill the cabin with the smell of home to make this place feel like something worth fighting for. Now it would serve a different purpose. Her father's voice echoed across 11 years. Thomas Whitfield, the Philadelphia miller, kneeling beside his 12-year-old daughter on the mill floor, explaining the dangers of his trade. Flour looks harmless, sweetheart, but give it a spark in a closed space and it will blow a building apart. Caleb, she said, the flour. Help me tip it. Josiah understood instantly. Dust explosion, flour particles suspended in air, and ignition source. It will blow the cabin apart. We retreat to the root cellar, Eliza said, her eyes bright with the fierce intelligence that had kept her alive when she was supposed to die. Stone walls, it will protect us from the blast. It will destroy everything, Caleb said, looking around the cabin. The curtains she had sewn, the herb garden on the windowsill, the pine boughs from Christmas still hanging from the rafters. Everything they had built together. Eliza took his face in her hands, small, calloused hands on a bearded jaw made of granite in grief. It is just wood and stone, Caleb. We are what matters. You and me and your brothers. The rest, we rebuild. They moved fast. Caleb and Josiah tipped the flour barrel. White powder billowed through the cabin, filling the air with a thick explosive cloud. Emmett scrambled in from the back, with Sargent under one arm, blood on his side but moving. Caleb kicked open the trapdoor to the root cellar. Josiah dropped in first, catching Eliza as Caleb lowered her down. Emmett pushed Sargent through and followed. Caleb was last, but first the performance. We are coming out, Croft, Caleb roared. Do not shoot. Smart move, Blackwood, Croft laughed from his hiding spot. Come out with your hands up. Caleb kicked the front door wide open. The draft swept in, mixing with the flour cloud, creating a swirling white fog that filled the cabin from floor to ceiling. He grabbed the kerosene lamp from the table. He looked at the cabin one last time. Their home. His mother's hearth. 17 years of his life. He threw the lamp into the white cloud and dove into the root cellar, pulling the trapdoor shut as the world turned white. The explosion was unlike anything the mountain had ever heard. The pressure wave slammed the trap door, but the heavy oak and the stone walls held. Above them, the cabin ceased to exist. The roof blew off in pieces. The walls shattered outward. The men piling brush against the west wall never saw it coming. The blast threw them backward across the clearing like leaves in a hurricane. In the cellar, 4 people and 1 dog held each other in the dark. Dust rained down. The earth shook. And then silence. A ringing, suffocating silence where the world used to be. Caleb pushed open the trapdoor and climbed out into gray light. The cabin was gone. Jagged teeth of timber stuck up from the foundation. The chimney, the only structure still standing, rose from the wreckage like a broken monument. Snow and ash swirled together in the wind. He lifted Eliza out, then Josiah, then Emmett. Eliza looked at the devastation and a tremor ran through her. "It is gone," she whispered. "Everything is gone." Caleb pulled her against his chest and pressed his lips to her ash-streaked forehead. "Not everything. We are here. The deed is in your pocket. The rest is just wood and stone." Then Caleb went hunting. He moved through the smoke like a ghost. This was his element. The mountain, the fog, the patient silent stalking of prey. Through terrain, he knew the way a blind man knows his own house. Croft's surviving men stumbled through the haze, deafened, bleeding, terrified. They had been promised an easy job. They had found a war. Josiah swept the perimeter from the opposite direction, clearing sectors with military precision. 2 of Croft's men surrendered without being asked, their hands in the air, before Josiah spoke a word. He bound them to a tree and moved on. Caleb found Pike crawling through the mud, still deafened from the dynamite, fumbling for a pistol. 1 blow from the rifle stock dropped him unconscious. Caleb tied him and continued. And then Eliza's voice rose from the ruins. Not a shout, not a battle cry, a recitation, clear, calm, and carrying through the canyon with the eerie clarity that mountain acoustics provide, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." Croft froze in the middle of the clearing. Alone, his hired men fled or fallen. The color drained from his face. "For you are with me." Wade Harker, pinned under Sergeant's weight, heard the voice and whispered, "She is a ghost. We killed her, and now she haunts us." "She is alive," Emmett said, grinning despite the pain in his side. "And she is scarier alive than any ghost you have ever imagined." A shot rang out from the chimney. Croft's hat flew off his head, pinned to a tree behind him by a bullet. Eliza had fired without breaking her recitation. "Your rod and your staff, they comfort me." Croft broke. He stumbled forward in a weeping, panicked run. 10 steps before Caleb materialized from the smoke directly in his path. 6 feet 7 inches of ash and blood and mountain fury standing in the clearing, like something risen from the earth itself. "Going somewhere, Harlan." Croft leveled his revolver at Caleb's chest. "I win," he snarled through his tears. "I kill you, I take the land." Caleb walked forward. No fear, no hesitation. "Stop!" Croft screamed. Click, click, click. "You fired 6 shots at the smoke, Harlan," Caleb said, not breaking stride. "You always were bad at arithmetic." Croft threw the empty gun and ran, past the chimney where Eliza was waiting. She thrust a heavy piece of firewood between his ankles. The mayor of Whispering Pines face-planted into the mud. A boot landed on his back. Caleb pinned him. Josiah arrived with military handcuffs. Emmett limped over with Sergeant trotting beside him, tail wagging. 3 brothers stood over the fallen mayor, and behind them, sitting among the ruins of everything she had built, with a rifle in her lap and a psalm on her lips, was Eliza Whitfield, the mail-order bride who was supposed to die. "We are not going to kill you, Harlan," Caleb said. "We are going to take you to town, and you are going to confess to everything." The procession that entered Whispering Pines the following day would be remembered for generations. Down the main street at noon walked Caleb Blackwood, limping, his left arm bound tight against his chest, the shoulder wound seeping through the bandage, covered in dried blood and ash, leading the mule with his good hand. Riding the mule was Eliza, wearing a coat of charred bear fur, her honey blonde hair loose and tangled with ash, the Bible in one hand and the deed in the other, sitting straight-backed and regal as a queen, surveying her kingdom from a throne of wreckage. Beside her walked Josiah, rifle at port arms, and Emmett, pale from blood loss, but grinning because Emmett always grinned. Sergeant trotted at the front as if leading a parade. Behind the mule, stumbling and weeping, his wrist tied to the saddle horn, walked Mayor Harlan Croft. Silk vest ruined, face swollen, muddied, broken, and paraded through the streets of the town he once owned. Sheriff Virgil Drayton stepped out of his office. "What is the meaning of this?" Caleb's voice carried to every corner of the street. "He is not an official. He is a murderer and a thief." Eliza spoke then. She waited for the silence, and the silence came because the whole town leaned in to hear the woman they thought was dead. She held up the deed. She held up Dutch's letter of authorization. And Wade Harker, brought down the mountain with his hands bound, confirmed everything. "Croft hired us, $20 a head. He told us to burn the cabin with them inside." Sheriff Drayton looked at the deed, looked at the confessing gunman, looked at the furious crowd. He took the handcuffs from his belt. "Harlan Croft, I am placing you under arrest for attempted murder, arson, and fraud." As the cuffs clicked shut, Croft looked up at Eliza. "I sent you up there as a joke. You were supposed to be a burden." Caleb stepped forward. He put his good arm around Eliza's waist, steadying her on the mule. He looked at the crowd, the people who had laughed, the people who had placed bets. "You were right about one thing, Croft," Caleb said, loud enough for every soul on the street to hear. "She changed our lives. You sent her up that mountain in thinking she was a burden. But she is not a burden." He looked up at Eliza. His amber eyes shone with something he had never shown the world before. Love open and unashamed on a face that had known nothing but stone for 17 years. "She is my pride." Old Jedediah Pruitt, the oldest rancher in the valley, removed his hat and bowed his head. Then a clap, then another. Then the street erupted. It took 2 years to rebuild the cabin. They built it bigger this time, with a wide porch overlooking the valley, a kitchen with a window that caught the morning light, and a separate bunkhouse for Josiah and Emmett 20 yards away. Caleb carved Eliza a rocking chair from mountain oak. It was ugly because everything Caleb built was ugly, but it would outlast them both. They married on the porch of the new cabin, with Reverend Thaddeus Cole riding up the mountain at 73 years old, because as he told anyone who would listen, he had never married a couple that had already survived a war together. Sergeant ate the first ring. Emmett carved a replacement. Their daughter Margaret was born the following winter, with Josiah reading from a medical textbook and Emmett pacing in the snow, with Sergeant both useless with worry. When Caleb held his daughter, for the first time in hands that had built cabins and fought armies and buried his parents in frozen ground, he wept. For the second time in his life. For the opposite reason. A son followed 2 years later. They named him Cornelius, after the decent man who had hidden a deed in a Bible and changed the course of a valley. Josiah won election as territorial judge in 1880. He never married, but he kept his copy of Marcus Aurelius with Eliza's notes in the margins until the day he died. And he kept Sarah's letter in the pocket nearest his heart, where it had rested since 1865. The paper soft as cloth from a lifetime of being carried by a man who never stopped loving the woman who wrote it. Emmett married Clara Hartley, the schoolteacher, and their first son was named Caleb, which rendered the eldest Blackwood brother speechless for the only time anyone could remember. Eliza broke Croft's water monopoly. She distributed the rights, fairly lowered rates, and let small ranchers thrive. The town of Whispering Pines transformed from a place of tyranny into a place of law, guided by the woman on the ridge who had once arrived with nothing but a Bible and a bruise. Emmett hauled a piano up the mountain on a mule train, 3 days of talking to the instrument as if it were a nervous horse. When Eliza saw it on the porch, she sat down and played the Christmas carol she had sung the night Caleb first opened his heart. Her left hand was stiff, the broken fingers never quite healed right, and she could not play the way she once had in Philadelphia. But the melody was there, imperfect and beautiful the way all things worth keeping are. The music drifted down the valley. Caleb sat beside her, eyes closed, listening, and for the first time in all his years on this mountain, Blackwood Ridge did not sound like a fortress odds against the world. It sounded like home. 30 years later, in 1908, they sat on that same porch. Caleb was 65, slower now. His back curved from decades of labor, his beard white as the snow on the peaks above. His left shoulder still ached in cold weather, a reminder of the bullet that tore through it on the day they fought for everything. But he was still larger than most men, and his hands, though stiff at the knuckles, still gripped Eliza's with the same quiet certainty they always had. Eliza was 53, silver threaded through honey gold, her blue eyes still bright with the intelligence and determination that had carried her up a mountain and through a war and into a life she never expected. Their grandchildren chased each other through the wildflowers. Margaret played piano in the parlor. Cornelius rode in from the fields, tall as his father and stubborn as his mother. Josiah had passed 2 years earlier in his sleep, peaceful, the book on his chest, Sarah's letter in his pocket. They buried him beside their parents in the meadow where the wildflowers bloomed every spring. Caleb built the coffin himself, oak planks joined with the same saddle notch technique his father taught him half a century ago. He did not cry at the funeral. He stood straight, held Eliza with one hand, held his hat with the other, and looked down at the grave of the brother who had been his blade, his conscience, and his best friend for 59 years. And the only sign that anything was breaking inside him was the way his jaw trembled just once before going still again. Emmett and Clara lived in the valley below their house, full of children and noise, and the smell of Clara's cooking, which Emmett still claimed was second only to Eliza's, though he said this quietly enough that Clara would not hear. He came up to the ridge every week, riding the trail that was now a proper road, bringing cheese and gossip and grandchildren. Sergeant had been gone for years, buried in the front yard with a marker that read, "Sergeant, good dog, bit the right people." Emmett had a new dog now, also floppy-eared, also named after a military rank. Captain slept on Emmett's boots and ate scraps under the table, and the cycle continued. Caleb held Eliza's hand as the sun sank behind the Tetons, rough skin against rough skin, both pairs of hands shaped by the same 30 years, weathered by the same winters, calloused by the same labor, softened by the same love. From the parlor, Margaret played the carol, the same melody, across 30 years and 2 cabins in a war, in a lifetime the same melody. Caleb closed his eyes and smiled, not the rare smile hidden in his beard, a full, open, peaceful smile, the smile of a man who had built his walls so high that no one could reach him until a woman with cornflower blue eyes and a Bible full of secrets walked up his mountain and showed him that the walls were not protecting him. They were imprisoning him, and she had brought the key. She still remembered stepping off that stagecoach into nothing. No husband waiting, no house in sight, just 3 bearded mountain men and 100 miles of wilderness. 30 years later, watching their grandchildren run through the wild flowers on a porch he had built with his own hands, she thought that was the day my life began. They had tried to destroy her with cruelty and him with solitude. They sent her as a joke, a mail-order bride for the mountain men, a lamb among wolves, but the wolves turned out to be guardians, and the lamb turned out to be a lion. Croft's joke had become his undoing, and their love, fierce, forged in fire, tested by siege, enduring across decades, became the strongest foundation the West had ever known. If you enjoyed this story tonight, do me a favor. Hit that like button so we can beat the algorithm. Share this with someone who loves a good frontier tale. And subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next one. Tell me in the comments, what did you think of Eliza's Revenge? Where are you listening from tonight? Thank you for being here. I will see you in the next story.